After about a month after my college departure, both of my parents had sent me a white box. The outside of it was decorated with what seemed to be a floral pattern. At first, I didn't really understand the meaning of the damn thing. My parents had always been more of a home crafting kind, never enjoyed buying things they knew I never used. At first, I didn't really understand the meaning of that box. Well, not until they told me what it contained. Notes. Small pieces of paper that held simple quotes and sentences, something to keep my spirits up when I needed it. Without really questioning it, I kept it. I knew my parents always meant well, even though they had a strange way of saying it, like the white box. All around the first few months of my first college year, the box just sat neatly stacked up between school books and journals that I had started to collect during my studies. The locket on the box was still intact, since I never bothered opening it. The concept of the stupid thing still bothered me. I felt if it was making me long for home. And as time went on, that's exactly what I did. Just longing for home. My flatmate didn't really strike me as a social person. The first week after I arrived at the campus stores, he held a low profile, not really wanting to socialize in any way, which I was fine with. I had never been the party person, not even when I was with closest of friends. So I let him be alone. For so many years, college has been the place where people are supposed to find themselves. That's what I had always been told. But there was no denying the fact that I almost hated it there. As I tried my best to keep up with studying, I could feel myself becoming more and more passive. Back in the day, there wasn't a single night where I didn't stay up late hours writing away, wishing I'd be something. But as the ever-growing fact became more apparent that my dream was far, far away, I just couldn't hold it up anymore. As time went on, I began pulling myself away from any human contact I had around myself. The schoolwork quickly started to go over my head, but I couldn't return home. Not after my parents had paid for the entire trip to get here. Not after spending so many hours trying to get in. Oh, the white box reminded me of that. With the loneliness, soon came the paranoia. I quickly accepted it, even without realizing it wasn't the best obvious choice. But I had become so tired, losing my entire focus on what actually mattered. Every day it became harder to even walk out the door. I gave myself excuses to remain in my single room in a shared apartment, waiting out hour by hour. A few weeks later, the teacher's emails about my absence stopped. It was as if I had no one to call, no one to trust. There was no way I was calling up an old friend or even knocking on my roommate's door. They hated me. I had no idea why they did, but that's what I kept telling myself, that I was simply good for nothing. That room became my cage. Then it was too late to return back. During the past few weeks of complete solitude, I had allowed old habits to creep their way back in. Skipping meals only to substitute them with cigarettes became, well, a daily routine, as well as sleeping through most of the day. But there was nights I couldn't sleep. I felt too restless. I wasn't able to fully relax the way I usually could, so instead I stayed up, like tonight. It had somehow escaped my mind that the box that I had received from my parents had remained locked all along. With no further ado, I decided to finally break it open. I tossed the locket aside before finally proceeding to open it. The description my parents had given about the box seemed relatively true. The thing had been filled with pieces of lined paper, neatly folded to give the keeper the extra effort just to turn them up and read them. But as I did so, I slowly came to realize how everything was leading up to this moment. It had been a complete waste of time.
Don't be afraid to call us if you need us. Never forget where you came from. We love you.
Before I managed to read any more notes, I slammed the lid together. The notes had been picked up or tossed out on the floor along with the box itself. The stress that had been weighing down on me since arriving here was suddenly pouring out like a river, forcing my vision to go blurry from dry tears. If I told myself it would have gotten any better by now, I would have been lying to myself. Things clearly weren't going better, and things would not look up. In a fit of rage, I left my room, grabbing my pack of white Winstons and set out into the night. The second I reached the outside, I allowed my lungs to inhale the chilling cold air. Despite being a heavy smoker lately, it felt even harder to breathe tonight. But the smoke at least made things a little easier, I guess. Several minutes passed and nothing seemed to be getting any easier. The contents of the box kept going through my head, the words repeating over and over until they didn't mean anything anymore. If my parents loved me so much, why did they let me leave? They knew what kind of hellhole being alone was, so why give me the option to do it? It just seemed so stupid. Too stupid to make any sense. As the rain began to fall, I scrapped the remaining piece of cigarette and decided to head back in. As I stepped on in, I couldn't deny I feared going back to the room and locking the door. Maybe if there was someone just to step in and stop me, what if... And in that same second of thought, I heard something. Slowly turning, I stayed on the same spot as before. I knew the house was old and could give off any sound possible, but this was something new. It was as if someone was breathing down my neck. With each step, I tried my best to ignore it, but the closer I came to the end of the stairs, the more obvious it was. Someone was actually right beside me. When I turned around, I already knew that I'd find nothing, but instead, what I found was a man. At first, I had problems making out who he was. Believing it was someone from the same floor as me, I wanted to give him a simple nod as a hello, but as I continued to look at them for mere seconds extra, there was no doubt that he wasn't from around here. The torn clothing and the black color scheme gave me the impression of someone who was homeless. Was he the one who had been breathing down my neck? And if so, how did he even get in here? With little bravery in my throat, I uttered a few words. No response. This was creeping me out. I just shook my head at the strange man, figuring I was better off going back to my room upstairs, but the second I took another step, a noise broke out. It was distant, but close. A hollow sound of crying had erupted my thought process, causing me to stop dead in my tracks. The man was crying. At this point, I had no intention of staying. I just wanted to leave, go back to my room and close myself in. As I tried to move, however, it felt like my feet were frozen, shut against the stairs. Turning slowly, I could already see him in the corner of my eye, and now he had turned to me. In front of me he stood, his sight the most unnerving thing I had ever seen. His face wasn't painted with scars or deformities in any way. It was completely gray. His eyes were two orbs of golden hue, glowing faintly in the dark stairway we both stood in. His mouth, that had been frowning, turned into a smirk, taunting me from across the few stairs that remained between us.
"You're alone, aren't you?"
As he spoke, his voice echoed with static underneath. He sounded like a broken radio, going through several transmitters to push his words through. I felt unable to turn my gaze away from him, in any way ignore him and turn back. Even with my brain standing still, my body suddenly moved on its own. My eyes kept still, looking at him before he turned away in my view. Before I knew it, my body had ran itself, instincts going wild as my feet had pushed me forward back into my room, slamming the door behind me. First few seconds went by, and it suddenly came down on me. The man I'd seen in the back in the stairway wasn't human, nor was he of this world. But the way he had spoken to me, it was as if he pretended to be someone I knew. Did I know him, or was this state of shock playing tricks on me, leaving me fragmented to only scramble myself together? It slowly dawned on me. All up until now, I had played it out as if everything had been fine, but it wasn't. Never had been. And now, my insanity, my entire feeling of loneliness, had presented itself outside my door. The weight on my shoulders seemed even heavier now, as if it was pushing me slowly down. My body felt so weak, as I felt my limbs going numb to the feeling of losing hope. My back against the door, I slid down towards the floor, with tears going down my throat. It took me a few good minutes before I was able to even look up again. With tears streaming down my face, it was hard to make out anything in the midst of the blur. My heart was pacing back and forth in my chest, beating hard. I knew I wasn't alone in my room anymore, and what scared me the most was that I allowed him inside. Once again the breathing returned, but this time I just didn't mind. I didn't care what he'd do to me, so when I felt him coming close, I merely shivered beneath his touch. He was cold, almost as if he had died and came back to life. But he wasn't anything more than a hallucination. That's what I kept telling myself. When his hand grabbed mine, I followed, my feet standing right up on the floor, my eyes barely able to see anymore. The longer he stood beside me, the darker it became. So when he asked me to dance with him, I said yes. His free hand wrapped itself around my waist, and the other kept its grip around mine firmly. My head slowly began leaning towards his shoulder. Being so close to him, it was impossible to avoid smelling him. He smelled wet, like tea that had been left in the cold, forgotten water far too long. His hair, torn and tangled, fell beneath my head, supporting my weight. Maybe he was the best thing that could have ever happened to me, maybe the worst. But I'd never lived long enough to tell. As we kept dancing, he started humming, telling me a story of a man he once knew, a puppeteer who could steer his puppets with his broken dreams. Even though no one saw the value of his friendship, he managed to turn them all to like him. But no matter how many friends he claimed, he always still felt lost, unloved, broken, alone. And then he whispered into my ear,
If you let me, I can guide you to him. But you need to let go.
There was nothing more to remember than the sweet story playing in my head when I closed my eyes. His cold, firm grasp held my body close to his as he seemed to lower me down, closer to the floor. My hand must have touched the surface below me at this rate, but the lower he allowed me to slip, the more I felt like I was floating.
Do you feel it?
Maybe. No. Yes. I hated to admit it, but as he had been plaguing my mind only seconds earlier, he suddenly set me free. I felt empowered, but empty. The bittersweet feeling of allowing myself to go this far was tainting my mind. Even when he whispered into my ear softly about my own choices, I couldn't help but feel selfish. Maybe he knew how I felt deep inside. Maybe that's why he came to save me away from this place. I wanted to believe him. I believed him. But the second I had let my entire mind go, that's when he betrayed me. The man I had first thought was there to protect me was now instead the one who sought out to destroy me. His hands had grabbed my wrist with a massive force, holding them still to keep his precision intact. With 2 distant cuts, I felt my wrist starting to pulsate, but no blood left me. Within my eyesight, I could see it clearly. My muscle was pulled out in long strings of vein and flesh, the sound causing my mind to go numb, my brain screaming for release. Every joint in my body was aching, trembling beneath his strong grasp. I tried to beg him to stop, tried to push him off of me, but no matter how hard I tried, he held me down. Gasping for air, the fingers within my vision had started to turn white as they were slowly pulling at his sleeve. From the sudden light-hearted sensation, I felt heavy. My body did no longer float. No. With my heavy heart, he was the only one who was able to carry me now. Carrying me over the floorboards, hauling my lifeless body with his simple touch. And his hands went for my neck. I drew my last breath. If I had been able to face how lonely I felt, I would have been able to tell my mom and dad that I missed them. I wouldn't have been too shy to tell my flatmate that I needed someone to speak to. I just couldn't stand facing all of my problems on my own. It took too long.